Now let's look at the postcode lottery. Postcode lottery is a fairly common topic that can come up if your interviewer wants to quiz you on the NHS. But to first understand about postcode lottery, you really need to know what is the current structure of the NHS, and in particularly the most recent reforms. The way the NHS works is that at the top you have the Secretary of State for Health, currently Jeremy Hunt, and he's in charge of the Department of Health as a whole. The money for NHS services goes directly from the Department of Health to organisations called CCGs, Clinical Commissioning Groups. They're made up of mainly GPs, but also hospital doctors, nurses and members of the public. Each CCG is responsible for improving the health of a particular part of the country that they represent. How do they do this? The main way is through commissioning, which means using the pool of money they receive from the Department of Health to buy products and services that they think are the most useful for their local population. So for example, the CCG of one area might think it's best to spend more money on services that work to reduce smoking, whereas a CCG of a different area might decide to spend more money on nursing homes to help a more ageing population. And it's this commissioning that leads to the problem of postcode lottery. By giving CCGs the power to make decisions as to what is most appropriate for their local population, it may mean that there are differences in the level of healthcare from region to region. So now, if we go back to our model answer to the question, what is postcode lottery? Here our model answer has two key parts. Number one, defining postcode lottery, and then secondly, giving an example of postcode lottery. Here our student starts by straight away giving a clear one-sentence definition of postcode lottery.
The postcode lottery is a problem within the National Health Service whereby patients receive different levels of healthcare according to where they live.
In our model answer, the student goes even further by bringing in the inverse care law, something that shows the interviewer that not only do you understand what postcode lottery is, you can also recognise that it's a problem that hits the poorer, more socially deprived communities the hardest.
And this is especially problematic because it tends to be the most deprived areas that already have the worst access to healthcare.
To finish off, our student gives a great example of postcode lottery. They're specific and add some context by mentioning a BMJ article.
And an example that I read about in the BMJ recently was that even for something as serious as cancer, the treatment available on the NHS was not consistent across the country.
In the description of the video, you'll see links to two recent articles that talk about the problem of postcode lottery. One of them refers to the inequalities in cancer care, and the other talks about differences in funding allocated for nursing homes. So make sure you have a read of those before your interview. In some of our own interviews, we found that medical schools sometimes pushed us even further. Two students at Imperial both got asked if they could think of a way that postcode lottery could be fixed. This can be really difficult if you haven't had to think about it before, but that's exactly what these videos are for, to prepare you for these really tough questions. So there are different ways to approach this question. One way is to attack the idea of CCGs having commissioning power. Remember, it's because CCGs have been given this responsibility to choose how to spend their money that the entire problem of postcode lottery exists. So in this model answer, our student discusses one solution where NICE, which is the organisation that comes up with suggested guidelines on how a disease should be treated, sets fixed national standards for certain diseases that must be met across the country.
And so one possible solution to this could be for the National Institute for Clinical Excellence to implement a set of minimum standards across the country that need to be met for long-term and chronic conditions such as diabetes, Alzheimer's and cancer.
What's really good about this answer is that the student adds that this idea could first be piloted with chronic conditions such as dementia and cancer that we already know from before, from those articles, are affected by postcode lottery. So just a final reminder, with a question about postcode lottery, think 2 steps. Start by defining postcode lottery, and remember, try and mention the inverse care law. And then secondly, give an example of postcode lottery. So things we've already talked about are cancer care, dementia treatment. And then be prepared for them to ask you about ideas to eradicate postcode lottery, potential solutions to fix this problem.